This is Small Business Big World, our weekly podcast prepared by the team at Paper Trails. Owning and running a small business is hard. Each week, we'll dive into the challenges, headaches, trends, fun, and excitement of running a small business. After all, small businesses are the heartbeat of America, and our team is here to keep them beating. Welcome to Small Business Big World, our weekly podcast discussing all things small business. This week, I'm joined by Derek Stevenson. Welcome.
Thank you.
Derek's with Varney Insurance. We're going to talk about some exciting insurance things, kind of the top pitfalls of insurance for businesses. And certainly, I think I've been through them, and I'm sure you many clients that have as well. So,
absolutely.
But yeah, so quick housekeeping before we get going. Don't forget to like, follow, share, rate, review, all of those fun things. We are everywhere you are at Small Business Big World. Would love to chat with you further all over the place. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, certainly feel free to email us at podcast@papertrails.com. So, well, great. Well, Derek, so talk to me about commercial insurance, right? We're here. It's an exciting topic.
Yeah, well, you teed it up as exciting, so that had me a little bit nervous. Insurance is not usually at the forefront of excitement.
But it's something we all need. And that's
absolutely.
And that's, all of us business owners, we kind of get into it and, someone says, hey, you need to talk to an insurance agent. Well, what is that? What is the most common things that small businesses need in terms of insurance, types of policies, things like that?
Absolutely. So right out of the bat, probably first and foremost is general liability, right? That is your slip and fall lawsuits, your very basic stuff. Every single business should definitely have that. It protects you from people coming on site, getting injured, whether invited or not. I always tell one of the crazy stories I've seen is two guys breaking into a retail shop, getting cut on the window on their way in, and then filing suit. And these guys were robbing the place. I mean, it's kind of wild. So you never know what's going to come up. Property insurance for your assets, certainly huge. And then, as you guys are very familiar with here at Paper Trails, is, if you have employees, you really need to consider workers' comp.
Sure. Wait, you don't need to consider it. You have to have it.
You have to have
right?
it.
That's a state law.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then you get into a lot of the gray area about independent contractors.
Sure.
There's some new material out that Maine's published. And those are probably your big ones. And then if you're driving for work, got to add auto.
No, for sure. What one piece of that workers' comp, I know we have a lot of clients that take advantage of employment practices liability insurance. That's probably something that should be tacked on to those workers' comp as well.
It should not only be tacked on, it should really be reviewed a little more. There are certain policies that you can kind of tack that on for a little bit of extra money, but they're not always quite what you want them to be. EPLI, you definitely want to get first and third party coverage. It's huge. We think...
So when you say first and third, what's that mean?
So covering both yourself as well as those that are coming after you.
Great.
So, one of the big examples we use is if somebody comes in and applies for a job. It's not necessarily employment practices liability for those you employ. It's the same about candidates you're turning away.
And if there's any discrimination, if there's any, harassment, anything, that's what EPLI covers.
Yep, absolutely.
So I was at a conference last week, and there was a bunch of folks in California there, and they said, now because of how crazy things are in California, they're seeing, deductibles for EPLI $25,000, $30,000, $50,000 depending on, the industry and so forth. So it's certainly important coverage, but, keep an eye on those things. We don't want those claims, right?
No.
Any claims. We don't want any claims.
No, absolutely.
So good. So let's talk about some of the pitfalls. So we've got, we have our insurance, we pay our premiums, which are always too much, right?
Yep.
Forever. Everyone thinks they're always too much for what we get.
By all means.
So what are some of the common things, you talked about exclusions. What is that? What are exclusions and why are they important, I guess?
Yeah. So every policy is going to have some level of exclusions. And exclusions are basically a way for the insurance company to not pay the claim. All right. So it's them taking out risks that they don't want to be a part of. For example, I had mentioned general liability before. In just about every general liability policy, you'll find a professional liability exclusion. Professional liability is like design things. It's working with numbers. It's more of the white collar pen and paper. If you mess something up there, general liability is not going to be covered or is not going to cover that because of that specific exclusion. And so we've kind of seen this cycle now of what we call a hard insurance market. Underwriters are getting really, really strict on their guidelines. Everything's being underwritten harder. And my impression of it is instead of maybe taking a risk to bring on more business, maybe 6-7 years ago. Now underwriters are just walking away if there's any risk. And so exclusions kind of give them this extra layer of protection. The problem is a lot of times they get put in there and nobody sees them. And exclusions can really make or break a policy.
Sure, paying for something and you may not be covered for it.
Yeah, and it's this necessary evil. You're not going to get away. You wouldn't want to pay for a policy that doesn't have exclusions. Some of the things they're excluding, for you, for example, Chris, at Paper Trails, you don't care. It's not, you don't operate in those grounds, and it's fine. For example, you probably have, I bet, in your insurance policy, limitations on what you can do in the state of New York, right? Something like that probably doesn't matter so much, but it's in there. And a lot more layers of this are being added on. So I think it's more important than ever before to get in and figure out what your exclusions are.
So are exclusions specific to the business, or are they specific to the policy? Say, hey, I'm going to have my general liability policy. Everyone in the state of Maine, we're not going to cover flooding anymore, right? We've had I know flood's a whole different thing. So that was a terrible example. But everyone in the state of Maine, we're not going to cover if you drive a red car, we don't cover red cars, right? Or are they going to come in and say, hey, Derek, you run, Joe's Pizza Shop. We've decided that drivers that deliver pizza in red cars drive faster, and we don't want to cover it.
Yeah. So great question. And because it kind of goes along in the same aspect of what we're seeing. Carriers, the ones that are actually insuring you, have had these sets of exclusions for a while, right? But they're adding to them. And sometimes they are becoming client specific. They are actually excluding things that a client is doing to make sure they're not in those operations.
Yeah, I know certainly the underwriting seems to be more and more stringent, I would say.
Definitely.
For sure. I know for the first time ever, we did our renewal and they asked for my employee handbook.
Yep.
Right? To say, do you have one of those? And unfortunately, a lot of our clients I know don't have handbooks, don't have a lot of policies. And so that's something that probably they're going to say, oh, red flag, right? EPLI premium just went up, EPLI, whatever, just, deductible just went up because you don't have your policies in place. You don't have your organization and so forth, which is hard for small businesses.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
What are the more common exclusions that you see? Is there anything specific?
Yeah. So, you had kind of gotten into it right away. Flood is a huge one right now that probably no one in Maine was really talking about except for very coastal territories. Now we're seeing some pretty major rivers that have flooded. We've seen the coast flood in more than we've expected, more frequent. I would say just about every property policy has a flood exclusion, and people don't realize that. And we're getting a lot of calls now from people who say, I can't believe I need flood now, but I do. Similarly, earthquake, same idea. It's on there. And
sometimes, the flood has to do with just the groundwater, right? We've had a really wet couple of years, and, people have had water in the basements that never had water before, right?
Yeah, it's a funky environment that we're living in the climate. And, we're getting some melts and thawing that we've never experienced at these alarming rates. And, the flood has been a very hot topic.
I always look at mine, and it's always got the terrorism, exclusion. If someone comes and blows my building up, it's not covered, which is little to no chance, I guess. But...
well, I can make you feel slightly better about that. So the Terrorism Act, TRIA, is what we call it, TRIA, basically came about after 9/11.
Sure.
And it was a way to say, you are making an acknowledgement here, knowing I'm either electing or declining terrorism coverage. And to take it one step further, you're only going to be paid on a terrorism claim if the government is declaring it an act of terrorism. Doesn't happen a whole lot. There's been some horrendous events that have happened that weren't declared terrorism. So for the most part, it's tough to justify needing that in many places in Maine, for sure.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see what the insurance company wants to take the risk on and what they don't. And it seems like these days they don't want to take the risk on hardly any.
For sure. And they want control, right? The underwriters want to control the risk, know what it is, be able to price it and account for it. Probably the next biggest one that you're seeing is pollution. Pollution is something, we're very environmentally conscious right now as a nation, hopefully a world as well. And, if you are causing pollutants to enter a waterway or, polluting some farmland, something along those lines, it's probably not covered unless you have a supplemental policy.
Interesting. And certainly here that seems to be, we hear that in Maine all the time with the PFAS thing.
Yep.
That's the big hot topic right now.
Great example too. PFAS now being added as an exclusion, written right out as PFAS. And it's just, another way to gain control over your risk.
Interesting. So certainly, insurance is important, but making sure that you have the coverage for what you need and what your business needs.
And you don't want to pay for stuff you don't need, right? So it does work both ways.
Right. You look at the policy and have a great agent to do so. Good. So other things, pitfalls people fall into in terms of contracts, right? So what sort of contracts are people entering into that they may have issues with?
Yeah, so especially on the small business end, people feel like if they take a contract from someone, let's say a subcontractor takes a contract from a GC, a lot of times, especially you're starting out, you're a smaller business, you're so excited to see that contract.
Yeah.
You look right to the dollar sign to see what the pay is going to be. You look at some of the itemizations, but oftentimes the insurance section is completely skipped. And a lot of times these GCs are trained to kind of mitigate as much of their own risk, oftentimes by direction of these insurance carriers. And you're taking on a lot more risk than you want to when you're entering these agreements. So I think the biggest takeaway I would have is look at that section and don't be afraid to push on it. The biggest one I see is a lot of these larger GCs with inner city experience and big projects that hire a subcontractor. They want them to carry a $5 million umbrella. Well, that's a massive insurance expense, right? For a lot of these subcontractors, especially those without a lot of credibility, maybe they're just starting out. Push back. Don't be afraid to push back. Have your insurance agent push back and think, could I possibly do $5 million worth of damage? And why do I cover that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I know, as we're talking about this, we had a client just last year. So they did subcontract work for a developer, built a big condo complex, and this was kind of their last hurrah, development before they retired. And, they cut some corners and so his homeowners association now is going after them. Well, now guess what? Guess who they're also going after is all the subs,
Every
right?
sub.
And, the sub, we have a client that was the sub and he's like, hey, listen, I drew this, I built this to your specs, I did it. Now he's having to go back and show off, show that he did everything the right way and did the work, in a professional workmanlike manner. And certainly he's had to file a claim on his insurance to help cover those legal fees to defend himself, which is crazy. So, certainly understanding those contracts when you're getting in there is important. So what about online, in terms of, exposure, right? So we all, the world has gone online today and, everyone's making funny TikTok videos, but how does that impact your insurance?
So way more than you'd ever think. So, to kind of start off with the grand scheme of things, we're talking about underwriting way more strict, right? They're looking into things a lot more. They're understanding operations more than ever. What is going to give you the better look into a business than seeing social media? And a lot of times it can backfire. We've seen quite a few different examples. I remember very specifically an auto garage shop that was basically hawking, used parts out of the lot as well. And the insurance company said, no, we're not taking that product liability with the parts you're strapping on these cars or selling as used parts. We see a lot of these landscapers who decide that they want to plow through the winter. Anything along those lines that you're putting online, that insurance company's going to know. And that's okay because we want to be forthright with our operations and we want to make sure we're covered for things like plowing, but it can backfire. And so before you post, I would always kind of go into it with this mentality of an underwriter's going to look at that and what are they going to think? And I've seen some pretty wild scenarios. I know I shared with you a little bit, so there's a chuckle starting. The craziest story I have is a motorcycle repair shop, and the guys wanted to create some attention. They had a YouTube channel, and at lunchtime, they went out in the parking lot and jumped some 50cc mini bikes over some beer cans, and that was enough. And, they weren't on shift. Nobody was there. There were no customers. They handled themselves well from a jumping dirt bike standpoint, but that was all it took for that underwriter to say, wait a minute, what is going on at that place?
Well, if you're doing it off the clock, you're probably doing it on the clock, right? That's probably what they assume.
For sure. Best part of that whole story was when I reported back that he was being dropped by insurance, the comment was, the beer cans were full. We hadn't even drank them yet. So, we've seen it all, but I would just say, caution on there. If you're picking up new operations, try and get in front of it first. Talk to your agent. don't make the post that we're doing something new or something crazy until you've...
Well, it's true. So we're going to add a new line of business here in our business. And the first thing, I've hired someone, she starts next month. I went and saw my insurance agent and said, hey, okay, this is a new service we're going to offer.
Yep.
Does my policy cover it? Or do we need to change it? Do we need to add something? Because now we are going into more of that professional liability world.
Definitely.
We're going to start offering HR consulting services,
Yep.
and we're going to start giving you true business advice, even more than we do today. So, I want to make sure that we're covered in terms of that. And certainly I'm announcing to the world that we're going to be doing that because I want the money to come in.
Absolutely.
So, we want to make sure that we're ready for that. So,
Yep.
I think that's a really good point as well. And again, we're all using social media to promote our businesses. Just think about how you do.
Yeah, you just got to be a little careful, right? You can still drive attention without red flags.
Yeah, it was interesting. Similar story. We had a client that did some work for, a public entity, and it was a story because there was some damage and they were on the news, and their guys were on the news doing repair work, and the insurance company saw they were on, lifts without hard hats or something like that. And I don't think they ended up getting dropped, but I know there was like the Spanish Inquisition, and basically the workers' comp company came back and said, okay, we are running you through an entire training process,
Yep.
Workplace safety, all this other stuff, which in that case probably came out as a positive, but it still could have gone bad. Right?
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah. They were
not even that they were trying to be out there. They just happened to be fixing a problem.
Yep.
And they saw, probably, the underwriter saw it on the 6 o'clock news, unfortunately.
Yep.
And they kind of get screwed. So that's, certainly that's a really good point for all of us in business to think about.
Definitely.
Is what are we putting online? And just, even with your personal stuff, you don't want to put yourself,
I think about it too in the political atmosphere of how polarizing everything is right now. Think again, in terms of what that underwriter is looking at, right? I always want to think that underwriter may have either side of that spectrum covered. They may be right in the middle, but I don't want to offend them as they're looking into me, right? And I am all for free speech and do it, and that's great. I'm not going to treat you different. But I can't tell you what's going to go on in that underwriter's brain when they see some of the posts. So, yeah, try and keep it pretty easy going.
Interesting. So, certainly, in this day and age, we talked about online stuff. That flows into cyber, right? So, are you seeing? My opinion probably is most businesses today need some sort of cyber coverage because we're all doing things online. We're taking payments online. We're doing, we have this exposure in our industry. We have a lot of private data that is potentially exposed. And certainly, I think we have a very expensive, very high deductible cyber liability policy. But, certainly, God forbid, knock on wood, we have an issue. I'm hoping that helps mitigate some of that a bit. But what are you seeing in terms of, cyber mistakes and people doing and not doing it?
Yeah. So, a couple of the big things right now is there's still a lot of pushback. At this point, when I'm going to meet with a client, it doesn't matter what they're doing. I am presenting cyber. I want you to at least know about it. Know what your risks are. Know what your price is to cover those gaps. Then you make the decision, right? I'll help you along the way, but it's your decision. And I'm still seeing a ton of pushback. And one of the biggest factors that we see is people have a lot of faith in their vendors. Whether that be, their card processing company, whether it be, whatever they're using, their expense software, invoicing, whatever you are sending is probably not as safe as you think it is.
Sure.
And I have a hard time thinking if we have a major leak, a breach of data from one of these big time processing companies, yes, they have insurance. It is not enough to cover millions.
Yeah, they're coming after. There are plenty of ambulance chases out there coming after everyone.
Exactly. And when that pool dries up, what are you left with? It's a scary, scary thought.
Yeah, and I think, not even like you said, the card processing and things like that, but it comes down to any of your data, right?
Yep.
And what reputational risk can that have? And, certainly there's the phishing and the vishing and all that kind of crazy stuff that, we deal with every day, quite
Definitely.
frankly. And I think it's really important to make sure that we're, you're covering for all areas of possibility. And let me tell you, folks, the scammers are getting better, right?
Yeah.
The firewalls are getting better, the technology is getting better, but we are the weak point, right?
Definitely.
The person answering the phone, the person checking their email, we are the weak point, right? And that's, and that has happened too many times to our clients, unfortunately.
I've also found, Chris, that a lot of times the things people have told me in the past about how they are safe, what they have brought in for firewalls, for example, and they think that's covering them. That is now the bare minimum to purchase cyber insurance. One of the big things is invoice manipulation, right? So Chris, you send me an invoice to pay for studio time for podcasting. You leave for the end of the day and a hacker has stole your email. Well, then the hacker emails and says, Derek, I'm sorry, but these are the actual numbers I want you to put it in. I forgot we just changed our bank last week. Seems mild to me. I go ahead and make that payment. Well, it's gone and in, units of Bitcoin before we know it.
Right.
It's a really scary thing. And the only way that carriers are offering invoice manipulation insurance coverage is with multi-factor authentication. So that's something where a couple years ago, people said, I'm fine. All my remote users are using MFA, multi-factor authentication. So I know we're not going to be, nobody's going to get on. Well, now you can't even get the coverage unless you have it.
Oh, I mean, our world, everything you do, I need a text code or an authentication code or, Face ID or something, which quite frankly has become quite a pain in the ass in some regards.
Absolutely.
But it's absolutely necessary to make sure that we have that because, like I said, these guys are out there scamming away. They're trying to find the weak link. They're trying to find a way in. And, certainly I know we've had to go through certain assessments and audits to prove our, responsibility in terms of that education and requirements that we have. We just went through one yesterday from our bank that our bank said, hey, you move money around, you need to have this audit every year to make sure that you're following the rules, you're doing the right things. And actually I haven't thought about this, but I probably should provide that to the insurance underwriter to say, hey, we are following the rules, right?
Yep.
So that would be a good one too. But what other types of assessments and things like that are you seeing?
So I would say at this point, everybody should be considering a cyber quote. And there's some really good companies out there that are providing a cyber risk assessment. I love it because I am not an IT guy, right? I just don't know a lot of the stuff that comes out on this assessment. I know the insurance aspect of it, but I don't know, your site host and migration and certificates and things like this. So you're getting a risk assessment just by getting a quote. I'll turn it over to employers so they can see exactly where their vulnerabilities are. You can share it with your IT folks. If you decide at that point that you don't need it, I'm fine with that too. But let's at least go through that exercise and make sure, because the last thing I want ultimately as an insurance agent, what would be the worst feeling in the world is, hey, I'm claiming this. Oh, wait, I don't have coverage. Well, why not? And I don't want them to suffer from that claim. But if you can at least on my end, CYA, cover your own butt. If you can at least do that and show them I did try.
Right.
We went through this and you opted not to. Lets me sleep a little better at night.
Absolutely. So we've talked about a lot of pitfalls. We've talked about the exclusions. We've talked about different contract issues, websites, online things, cyber. Is there any one takeaway that you think, when you're talking to a client, pay attention to this? Any one of those or anything else?
Yeah, I think the biggest tip I would give is kind of going back to the exclusions. The number one thing you can do in your insurance policy is get a digital copy, push Control F when you open it. That allows you to find a word within a document, type an exclusion, sit down and grab a beer.
And see what it says.
Because it's a scary path. You really need to advocate for yourself, and that's the best way to do it.
Of course. And I tell clients all the time, yes, you have these great advisors, we have great insurance agents, we have great attorneys and accountants and so forth, but you have to take action in your own business as well. And you have to take responsibility for what you're buying and what you're doing and how you're operating. And it's a lot, right? There is a lot of shit we have to worry about as small business owners.
Definitely.
And, this unfortunately is just one of them. I feel like life is getting more and more complicated every day.
Yep.
And certainly this is one of those things too. So.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Derek, thank you so much. Derek from Varney Insurance. How do people find you?
Best way to find me would definitely be on LinkedIn. I'm sharing a lot of good content info on there that people can get. Other than that, look.
Derek Stevenson, LinkedIn, Varney Insurance. That'd be great. That's
absolutely.
Perfect. And if you can find him on Instagram, let him know.
Yeah, good luck.
Send him a DM. Well, good. Well, thanks again. And be sure to like, follow, share, subscribe, rate, review everywhere you get your podcasts, or subscribe from everywhere. Again, any questions for us, for Derek, if you can't get a hold of him, you can't find him on Instagram, feel free to email us. We're at podcast@papertrails.com, and we'll be happy to get you in touch. So Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you again next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Small Business, Big World. This podcast is a production of Paper Trails. We are a payroll and HR company based in Kennebunk, Maine, and we serve small and mid-sized businesses across New England and the country. If you found this podcast helpful, don't forget to follow us at @PaperTrailsPayroll across all social media platforms, and check us out at papertrails.com for more information. As a reminder, the views, opinions, and thoughts expressed are the hosts and guests alone. The material presented in this podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be considered legal or financial advice. By inviting this guest to our podcast, Paper Trails does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific individual, organization, product, or service.